I feel like my kind of aha moment in that realization was really getting into doing technical peer reviews of envelope design, when you really get that repetition of reviewing contract documents and drawings and specifications, one in terms of the other, and you start to realize what the processes are behind the scenes.
It's kind of like the Joe Rogan style. I feel like they're 3 minutes into the conversation, and then the guest is just like, "Hey, we started," and then he's like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
the best stuff usually comes on before they start." But first of all, it's great to meet on this format. But really, what sparked me to want to have you on is you're probably the most consistent producing content producer, either maybe
On
within
LinkedIn.
IBEC or on the facade consulting side. So A, I'll give you credit to that. B, and I'll ask, is that new? Is that a new strategy or approach for you?
Yeah, I kind of started it maybe 6 months towards the end of last year. Obviously, folks like to, do their cold outreach and various other marketing forms to their clients. And I thought a good way to kind of, you know, put our name out there, my name as well, and what we do, here at SK&A, out to the public was through LinkedIn. And rather than kind of highlight all the, project highlights and kind of boring content that you tend to see on LinkedIn, I wanted to kind of put something a little bit more, knowledge based sharing of information. So I kind of started asking myself, what are some questions that clients tend to ask me, or what are questions that have come up on projects, and kind of sparked ideas from there, and just started generating content and put myself through the ringer, obligating myself to post like Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays to put out some content. So I had some volume. Now I get frustrated when Wednesday hits and I don't have anything to post. But yeah.
Well, I think the consistency part, it sucks at first, and then it becomes easy and you get in the rhythm and habit of doing it. Um, and then you're
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, I need to keep putting myself outside my comfort zone. So soon you're going to be starting with the videos and audio and different formats. And really, like, I think people put so much pressure on themselves to produce and create content. But from what I read with you, it sort of feels like, I mean, you've heard this before, you're just documenting the process, but really, like, it feels very organic and genuine, as if you're in the field taking pictures or answering what's an air barrier. How do you ensure safe rope access protection? Like, you're really just answering your everyday either client questions or questions that employees might be coming to you, or mentees might be coming to you asking for guidance on.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the ideas for the content generation just come from being in the field. And I think that's kind of the unique aspect of the content in particular. It's just trying to find that unique insight that, maybe you have a high level understanding of something, but this gets a little bit more granular into the things you're not going to find necessarily in a textbook or anything like that. It really comes from experience. And like I said, it's sometimes if you commit yourself to committing that much content, 3 times per week, um, every time I'm in the field, I kind of force myself, hey, what's something that caught my eye, or what's something that I saw that reminded me of a conversation I had with a client or an employee, years ago. That's a good piece of content. And then, take a picture of it, put a little meat to it, and post it. And I feel like a lot of people reacted well to it and engaged with it. So
What, why do you see it differently than 99% of the consulting or forensic side of the business
I,
that sees putting, their work product on the internet as somewhat of a liability?
I don't know. I feel like I generate content or insights that I would want. You know what I mean? Like I feel like, like I said, posting project successes or things like that are kind of what everyone else is doing. And when you have a platform like LinkedIn and the expansive network that you have with people like you and I have never met personally face to face, but that's a network that we've established, and I know you and your content and things like that, and I've gained insights from your content, and I just wanted to contribute more to that. And so I feel like that was kind of the genesis for how I wanted to approach putting content out there, something that was useful, valuable to people, that something they wouldn't just scroll past or scroll through. And that if they read it, they said, "Well, I'm glad I took 5 minutes to read that, or 2 minutes to read it, or something." So,
You're on the, oh, I am a lot of the times too, but on the really unsexy side of the business,
mhm.
air barriers, building restoration, stuff that people overlook or most people don't care about. And the way to gauge that really is to take a non-industry folk and point something out. And you could tell when they start to gaze over and you lose industry. So how do you think about, because a lot of it really is educating the basic principles and like core foundations. And I think back to when I was a student, I studied mechanical engineering undergrad, and something I didn't necessarily find a lot of the curriculum engaging. I think it was more the means of delivery. And so you could take the same topic or subject through two different avenues or channels and make it very engaging and interesting, or make it very dull. So how do you think about kind of shedding light or awareness to some of these things that, I mean, I'm in New York City, and people have no clue to what extent the conditions are of 70% of these structures, and how much money and investment and time and resources from the contracting and engineering side that has to go into maintaining them. So how do you put a spin on, I guess, making people care?
Well, most of my clients have existing buildings. Obviously, they're mostly property managers or stakeholders in that realm, so they do care. The difficulty is really kind of making them understand the more technical aspects and breaking that down into the so what, or why does it matter, or it costs this much, kind of sticker shock, into that aspect. I find in the new design world, when I'm doing consulting work for enclosures, the way I do it is by talking so much about kind of preventative, or not preventative maintenance, but future maintenance. When we're making markups on drawings and we're working through, robust or critical transition details, I'm kind of pointing out like, hey, this should be accessible. We should at least consider that for the future. It usually falls on deaf ears, but when I'm doing my own technical reviews, coming from a repair and restoration background, I really like to focus on that and make those considerations because, I know it's important, and the people that end up owning and managing and maintaining the building, they're the ones that ultimately bear the brunt of decisions that are made, during the ground up construction. But it's difficult. I feel like, they're difficult conversations to try to get that perspective, and the incentives matter, and it's hard to kind of frame it in the right way. You just kind of have to pay attention to what people are saying and what appeals to them and what matters to them, and try to go from that angle.
Who do you enjoy interfacing with the most? The direct client, meaning building owner, the design team, or the contracting side?
I'd have to say like all three of them. Each has their own, range of pros and cons. I'd say, from your existing building owner, just their responsiveness is very, very much there. They kind of like a more practical mindset, not to discredit architects that and say they don't, but these are the folks, like I said, maintaining and operating the buildings. They're managing the funds for the buildings. They understand kind of the soup to nuts aspects of it. And it's a little less abstract. Most of the challenges and the discussions with them are, okay, we understand how this project is going to take place. We understand what needs to be done. How are we going to do it? We've got current occupancy. We've got limited budgets. We've got other irons in the fire in terms of trying to get tenants in the building and things like that. So you're kind of having those conversations. Whereas, ground up construction, I just love the collaboration and working with various different, consultants. And I always value the conversations I have with architects and MEP consultants, because I just learn something new every day. You kind of have your stovepipe area of expertise, but they all overlap in some realm. And I always gain a lot from having those collaborative conversations. And I like those types of conversations. And, from the contracting side, I mean, they're the ones that keep you grounded in terms of, what is actually feasible. I feel like there's sometimes more friction in those relationships, than the other two. But if you have a good relationship with the contractors that you work with, those conversations are extremely invaluable, and they get a level of respect for you, and you get a level of respect for them, and that's reciprocal, and it helps you guys grow both in both areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly not coming off as the consultant that's going to come up and just, red mark everything and get you in trouble, raise awareness to poor work product, whatever it might be. And we've repeated it many times here, just making it more of a collaborative approach. What I think in New York and certain jurisdictions, we have things like FISP and local law 11. So there's just it's such a congested area of existing buildings. So there's a lot of visibility, and you have a lot of scaffolds up, and just between like we talk about like visual versus physical inspections, and accessibility to these buildings is a very relevant topic always and forever. It's never going to go away. what is the flavor of the day in your world? And I say that because you're the only person I've ever seen posting about rope access so consistently. And I don't know much about it. The only thing I could think of is in my new apartment building. I hear my girlfriend screaming, and she looks out, and it's a guy, suspending himself down a rope, right, right outside the bedroom. But other than that, people don't see it. But it's part of your everyday world. So is it something that's more applicable now, or are you just raising awareness to it?
I mean, this past month, the kind of rope access month posts that I created were really more time towards gearing up for recertification and getting some of our other staff certified this year to expand our team. But yeah, there's a lot of nuance there. I think people kind of just look up or they see a window washer or somebody on a rope system and they're just like, oh, that's interesting. And they don't think about every little piece and component that goes into it in terms of the training and the technical knowledge on top of, the engineering knowledge that you carry with you. But I would say, DC has probably floated around the idea of a facade inspection program for a while. I think they've looked at New York and other cities that have it and have seen the overhead protection scaffolding and things like that installed. And I think they've kind of shied away from it. But the real reason that we started doing rope access was really just because of our clients. We wanted to make sure that we removed as many barriers as possible so that they can maintain their buildings. And not just exclusive to DC, but every jurisdiction. I'm sure it's expensive to get a contractor to actually power up a swing stage. There's also limitations in terms of like which buildings can actually get a swing stage platform on there. So we had kind of just asked the question, well, why aren't we doing this? And can we do it? And that led us down the path. And now we've got a capability that is cheaper than a swing stage in terms of what we can actually get covered in a day. For about the same cost of a swing stage, we can get 2 or 3 people in a building and complete anywhere between 8 and 12 drops and actually get up close to the facade, do our inspections without wasting capital on the swing stage access. Now we have clients, of course, where DC's got a lot of 1950s 1960 era buildings that have really transitional facades where you've got like header courses locked onto the slab edges or inverted angles on the slab edges and things like that, where you want to open up the brick masonry. But we can introduce that incrementally. We don't have to just mobilize swing stages and get on the building and spend all that money. We can put a rope access team on there first, find some critical areas that make sense to open up, and then introduce those incrementally as opposed to spending a lot of money up front. So yeah, we just wanted to be responsive and flexible to the clients, and myself and the other engineers that do it, we just like doing it. It's honestly, it feels much safer in a weird way to be on a rope system than on a swing stage. If anyone that's been on a swing stage will attest, it's kind of a little nerve-wracking, and then when you get up to the top, you see how it's rigged and tied off and everything. It just seems not as safe, but we like the rope systems.
So that's I would think the opposite. I've been on many swing stages. Not by choice, but how easily sort of retrofittable or adaptable are these buildings to incorporate some type of rope access system? Can you just slap it on anywhere on the roof? I'm not really sure what that process looks like.
So rope access is unique. So I guess I'll talk about it in broad categories. So the window washers you see on bosun's chairs, they fall under the purview of OSHA. They're doing what's called rope descent, right? So they're simply just descending down the building. So they use different equipment. There's different standards. Obviously, all those things fall under the purview of OSHA. There's limitations to that. They've got to use engineered roof anchors and things like that. When you start getting into industrial rope access, I mean, this runs the gamut. And I didn't really know this until I started doing training and certification. But you have oil rig workers, entertainment industry people, people that work in movies. They set up sound equipment, safety equipment, and things like that. And then you've got your engineers and contractors and things like that. But industrial access is unique because it allows you to both ascend and descend, aid climb. There's different maneuvers that you can do. But in terms of setting up a rope access system, if you don't have like engineered tie-off points, like your davit bases or your roof anchors, you can establish your own anchor systems. So, on a few buildings that we worked on in the past couple of years, they had nothing. Like it was a complete flat wood framed roof on a historic building. The only thing that we had to tie off to was an overrun for a stairwell. So we used, round slings, wrap that around that enclosure, and then use that as our anchorage point. So we don't have that kind of limitation. Now, if there's nothing on the roof, obviously it makes it a little bit more challenging. But for the most part, there isn't really a building that we can't get on because we can establish our own anchorage systems, even if they don't exist.
For existing buildings or even new construction, how much are you seeing sort of a draw or demand for accessible rooftop areas for tenants, and then that may impede on the type of BMU system or davits or whatever that may or may not be able to be integrated into the roof system?
I feel like, well, the demand for the roof terraces in DC is very high. There's a lot of repositioning projects that's almost a guarantee that you're going to see that as part of the reconfiguration of the building. They like to have that amenity space. They like to have the green roofs and those type of areas. But a lot of I haven't seen a lot where they've taken that and retracted from the facade access. If anything, it's like fully integrated. You may have clunky davit bases or something like that that are associated with putting a swing stage arm on, but they're always kind of concealed beneath pavers or decoratively covered and placed into the greenscape or other areas. So I haven't really seen the limitations there on the buildings that I've worked on.
I think it's generally jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I mean, I think cleaning your windows from the inside is a draw in New York City, whereas you go elsewhere and people don't seem to care or want it. Meaning in Boston, you see a lot of rope access, um, and especially just access or during renovation projects or new construction, where means of accessing the exterior is required for caulking or whatever necessary work. Do you focus a lot on roofing?
Mhm. I'd
Because
say
your
it's
area
on the
seems to
lower
be a
end.
little bit all over. Are you guys encompassing the entire building envelope?
Yes.
And so
Yep.
where is
Below.
your sort of next area to want to live in?
It's right there for now. It's kind of a weird, Genesis story. The repair and restoration division here got started in the 90s, and it was, purely structural in that regard. But over the decades, a lot of the structural issues that we were finding were obviously related to some kind of form or failure of waterproofing flashings or some kind of other building enclosure component. So that expertise started to build, and it kind of just naturally transcended into, we've got structural engineers, but they've got a good, thorough background and understanding in building envelope systems. Now there's a handful of us here that have very extensive knowledge, and we're doing the consulting on the ground up construction and a lot of that springboards of having relationships with architects with our new design side who do nothing but ground up structural engineering. But yeah, I mean, we kind of go where our clients go, and we try to match what their needs are. And if that means we're, expanding more into the building envelope piece, then that's that. And, the roofing was another part of that. A lot of roofs were, IRMA configurations, and they've got PT roof decks, and they had tons of issues with failed waterproofing systems and, failed PT. And it kind of just didn't make sense for us to bring in another consultant to do the roofing. So we started, doing more of that so we could be a one-stop shop and address not only the structural issues, but the waterproofing, roofing, building facade, below grade waterproofing, all of it.
I think I'm not a roofing expert, but I somewhat know the fundamentals. It seems I'm trying to remove myself from the industry and look from the outside. It seems very simple. It seems like you know your areas that are going to be problematic at the parapet or coping transitions. Um, what's the big miss? What's that rinse and repeat detail that doesn't seem to get through to certain project teams that continues to be the issue time and time again?
Um, I mean, it depends on the roof system, honestly. A lot of the office buildings in this area are precast clad. So what that means when they get up to the roof deck level, the parapet's formed by the precast extending beyond, right? They've got that perimeter joint. It's rarely ever sealed. And so a lot of the roof failures that we see with that type of configuration, whether it's a build-up roof or an IRMA roof, is you've got all the warm moist air within the building just escaping through that joint. Now it may have some fire stopping material. There's not an air barrier. So that air goes into the roof, condenses, and it just causes the roof to fail. We've had, EPDM roofs that have been fully adhered or mechanically adhered, and they start flapping in the wind because those fasteners just completely rust away. Um, there It may seem easy, I think, from a roofing perspective. It's a nice kind of flat canvas for the most part, and you're just trying to keep it waterproof. But there are a lot of things I think that go into it. You've got wind uplift, you've got you know, air control layer, vapor control layer, like all the principles you would find in an exterior wall apply to the roof, but there's some nuances there that make it particularly challenging. And then you've got a lot of overlapping codes and other requirements when you're talking about your sheet metal, your terminations, and things like that. So, I mean, it does require a certain level of expertise to kind of transcend and get into that aspect, but it's completely manageable in my opinion.
It's
As
funny
long as you do the
that
homework.
people think failing roof, they think a leak, a water leak, but equally what you just brought in is you could have a thermal failure, especially because now you have your R value requirements for your roofing, but also a structural failure, which many people overlook.
Yeah, I would say, most of the roof failures that you see aren't because the roof membrane or other macro material has failed. It's a failure in some kind of detailing, um, some kind of interface between materials, whether it's, roof to wall or just your flashings between the various penetrations through the roof. Um, but yeah, like, your cold form metal roof decks, your precast facades, a lot of those roofs just have a lot of uncontrolled, air movement in them, and they tend to lead to issues in the future. When you're getting into the build-up roof systems, a lot of that spends, it comes from the flashings, the materials that were used, how they were terminated. And I think you had mentioned, just the increasing R value. So many of the re-roofing projects, the challenge becomes, okay, it's not so much the technical aspects of what we're doing. Now we've got to add additional insulation, and we don't necessarily have the height to do so. Not so much around the perimeter, but like thresholds, interior penthouses, and things like that. It becomes a real challenge when you're trying to coordinate proper slopage and getting enough insulation in there to meet the new code requirements. So
It's interesting that so many in the envelope side of things talk about the significance of the um, collaboration or integration between the facade consultant and the mechanical consultant, just because the two systems depend on each other so much in terms of if you have to beef up your envelope or if you have to beef up your mechanical system or vice versa, if you can make both more efficient. But my design manager is actually has a structural engineering background, and it's like the first question every project he asks me for the cladding or design pressures, because that's like the first thing he goes to in terms of sizing the members, sizing the anchorage. How, I guess, what are some of your thoughts on that in terms of the significance of the collaboration or integration between the envelope expert and the structural professional at hand or structural engineer record?
I think it's important. I think it's often overlooked. I mean, people just get packets and packets of submittals, and they just have all this laboratory testing information in there, whether you're talking about the fasteners or the framing of the fenestration itself. You know, even making the translation between, a structural engineer is going to give the wind uplift criteria and the zones of the roof to the design team or to the contractor in the contract documents. Um, but the structural engineer going that next step and like verifying that a roof assembly actually meets that wind uplift requirement. I don't know how often it happens, but it's definitely a critical piece, particularly if you're going to use like an adhered roof system versus mechanical fasteners. Like I feel like a lot of that stuff is probably overlooked. Um, and the other challenging thing, and a lot of architects lean on us for that answer, when you have ballasted roof systems. How much weight are you getting out of your pavers? Do they need to be strapped? Vegetated roof systems, wind uplift resistance for those, they're kind of proprietary. They're not as easily accessible as, a build-up roof system with a traditional membrane. You can't necessarily just dig up that information as easily. And I feel like a lot of architects are coming back to the structural engineers for those answers. And they, of course, don't necessarily have that experience being structural engineers, right? That's an enclosure question. And the question kind of gets kicked back to the architect, and the architect's, well, the contractor says this, and, they go from there. But yeah, I feel like there's definitely not a symbiotic relationship with structural and enclosure the way there is like with mechanical enclosure, if that makes sense.
I definitely see a lot of tension or conflict between sort of textbook sort of technical practice of checking the box versus practicality, and a lot of, oh, that's, we don't love that condition, like have your engineer look at it or have a engineer look at it and sign off on the condition, and like, okay, if we see that stamp it must mean that it's okay. But there's there's like the real life practicality of like, condensation's a perfect example. It's like, does it meet the condensation resistance factor? But then it's like, okay, you exceed it, but then depending on the application in real life, you might have condensation or vice versa. Relying a little bit too much on the engineering side and textbook side instead of real life practicality. It's kind of like running structural calculations versus doing real life testing and verifying. And sometimes you see pretty despairing results between the two. So I think that is the other side of it. It's definitely important to have a technical sort of licensed design professional, architect or engineer looking over things. But I think if you rely a little too much on that side, you can go down a rabbit hole as well. I think that's like that friction between the contractor and the design team. I think that's healthy because usually you meet somewhere in the middle or somewhere that's most appropriate, and each side is usually pulling too far in one direction or the other.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's funny that you bring up like the condensation factor. Like, I'm sure you've experienced this too. Like that may just be written into a spec as well. You know what I mean? Like it meets this specified parameter, but like, did the specified parameter actually account for the exact, the way it's going to be installed in the field, or what what the conditions are going to be in the field? Does it even make sense? And the contractor, of course, is just trying to submit and put something together that meets that requirement, but will it actually perform the way it's intended to? Sometimes that's lost in the specs.
How do you think about, I struggle with this a lot. How do you think about training and influencing staff members to, yes, rely on design documents or construction documents, but also, have the keen eye of practicality, meaning I can't tell you how many projects are either sold or we're pursuing, and then I'll have a project manager or engineer come back and say, but this is written in the specs, or look, this is written and I say, no, look, think about the practicality of the application, and either it was overlooked or it was a mistake, and then trying to delineate with a project team member, oh, this one matters and this one doesn't matter. So all of a sudden it makes people question everything.
Yeah, I feel like my kind of aha moment and that realization was really getting into doing technical peer reviews of envelope design, when you really get that repetition of reviewing contract documents and drawings and specifications, one in terms of the other, and you start to realize what the processes are behind the scenes, and you start to realize like, oh, these design folks that are putting the drawings and the aesthetics and everything together aren't talking to the guy in the closet writing the specifications, and neither the two shall ever meet, and these two documents come together to merge and form the contract documents, and they're completely out of sync. So I feel like a lot of folks that maybe just kind of rely on the specs don't fully understand or haven't been through that repetition of like, no, I've reviewed these one in terms of the other, and you can see how comments are picked up and how things come as like a master spec that they used on the last project and get carried forward and haven't been kind of integrated to what the project actually is. So you learn to kind of take those things. If you see them with a certain grain of salt, you can kind of spot it as you review those documents. Let's say I was given a contract set that I had no involvement in. I could read through the specs pretty quickly and identify like, oh, this doesn't seem to be coordinated at all. So that information probably isn't valid anyway. So that kind of steers your engineering judgment a little bit more towards, okay, what do the drawings say? What's the actual application, versus just leaning on, well, the specifications say this and we must adhere to it. I think those are nuanced conversations that require a little bit of experience, but I think the best way to gain that experience is to go and do those repetitions and see that process.
People, I think, are also very reluctant to ask questions and look uninformed. I can't tell you how many times a contractor looked at documents or requests from a consultant and said, are you kidding? They're asking for an end dam or an end cap to be UPVC instead of aluminum because they think there's going to be thermal bridging. Meanwhile, it's an interface and a 16th of an inch. And like, they think, oh, here's another consultant trying to reinvent the wheel. And it's like, well, no, they're just trying to see if they can enhance the performance. Let's just get on the call and ask them. They're going to state that. They're going to say, do you guys have any options here? It's okay to say, we don't have options. These are the cost implications or lead time associations with making that change and having a discussion. The minute you rely primarily on email or just written communication, it's just like the feedback loop of like send to contractors, send to GC, send to owners, send to consultants, send to this, and it just creates so much more work for everybody that it's like the amount you can get done if you just get on a page turn with a project team for 40 minutes. You'll literally save 4 weeks of emails.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's so much filtering that goes on in those email correspondence between like what the initial conversation was all the way down to a subcontractor or something like that that's getting it from the GC and trying to, trickle that information back up to people, like trying to have, those collaboration conversations and make decisions. But yeah, I feel like if things are big enough of an issue, you should get on a conference call. Like we have the technology. Face to face isn't always, going to happen, but it's too easy to like get on a Teams call for 5 minutes and just talk through an issue and talk about the pros and cons and the implications of this, that, and the other, and go from there. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on. It was fun to open up the curtain a little bit and hear what's going on behind the scenes. I figured it might be good for you to share just your involvement with IBEC and then what the DC chapter is up to, or anything new coming up this year.
Sure. So yeah, I got involved with our local chapter here. I want to say like 3 years ago. A guy I know that I'm close with was like, "Hey, I think you should get involved with IBEC. You've been involved with ICRI since forever." And I had been a member of IBEC for quite a long time, but never involved kind of like at the local level. So he convinced me to come on board. I came on board as the treasurer and then the VP and now president of the Mid-Atlantic chapter. And I love it. And I love all my engagements with IBEC. I really like, particularly they've got a workshop that they do every fall that's down in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it's just a blast. You get to meet all the same people, but different chapters across the United States, collaborate with them, talk about what their chapters are doing, this, that, and the other, and share ideas. But as far as our chapter is concerned, I think, this year we're definitely going to have our golf tournament, which we have every year, which is a big turnout. It brings tons of roofing consultants, facade consultants, engineers, contractors alike to go out for a day on the links. I'm not a golfer, but I will begrudgingly be there. And then, just kind of our flair and our chapter, what we like to do in the fall around October is have our crab feast. The New England chapter's got their lobster dig, but we've got our crab feast here in the Mid-Atlantic region. So that brings everyone together and we have a crab boil and food and everything. So it's a good time. But yeah, I'm excited for what the rest of the year has for the chapter. But those are kind of the two big events that we like to highlight and encourage people to come out to.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, Justin. And
yeah, appreciate it.
You'll see your face on the internet soon.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Take care.
All right. See you.